Hello, I'm Michael Plant. I'm an associate professor at Tulane University, and I'm thrilled that you're joining us tonight for this very special edition of the Plug-in webinar series. If you have any questions during the course of this Zoom webinar, please put them in the chat function. To kick things off, it's my pleasure to introduce Max Hollein. Max is the director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and a current Tulane parent. Take it away, Max.
Hi, everyone. And thank you, Michael. I'm very excited to be here. My son, Lois, is a Tulane student, a freshman, and he's very excited to be here. He loves everything at the university, including hurricanes and everything else. But I'm also here just to be able to share a very important exhibition with you. And that exhibition became possible because of Anne Tenenbaum, who is a fellow Tulane parent, a great member of the Tulane board, and also an outstanding member of the board of the Metropolitan Museum. It showcases her and her husband's Tom Lee collection and her spirit of collecting. But it also showcases her enormous generosity by making her collection be a promised gift to the Met. So the idea is really also of Anne's and Tom is really to share this collection, share these great artworks with the public and with all of you. And so we want to share that with you in a virtual event. We would have loved to have you all at the Met, but I think we can do it also very well virtually. And so what happened is that 3 students also have been working on this in Michael Plant's class of contemporary art since 1950, and that's Alex Landry, Cameron Pigg, and Quinn Stovall. And I want to invite them now to speak to us about how this show and some of the objects inspired them. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Quinn Stovall, a sophomore at Tulane, and thanks to Anne Tenenbaum and Thomas Lee, we are able to view an astounding collection highlighting achievements in photography over the past century. This collection has a strong focus on women artists and artist beginnings. While looking through the catalog for a piece to present, I was instantly drawn towards the depth and contrast presented in the 1936 piece Out of the Rear Window Tenement Dwelling of Mr. and Mrs. Jacob Solomon, 133 Avenue D, New York City. Taken by prominent Works Progress Administration photographer Dorothea Lange in the beginning of her successful career, I believe that this image is a marvelous representation of the catalog. Dorothea Lange was focused on social responsibility and her art and career with the WPA highlighted just that. Concentrating on Depression-era home life, Lange tried to capture the strength of women in her work. She is most notably recognized for her piece of the same year, Migrant Mother, in which she presents a family in the West struggling with the repercussions of the Great Depressions, being held together by the strength of the mother of the household. Similarly, her photo of the Solomon's tenement carries strong underlying messages of the strength of women in home and life. With very little in the image, the eye is immediately drawn by the clothesline to the bright white linens hanging in the back. There is only a chair and a mop on the porch, clearly presenting this area as a cleaning space. And in the 1930s, cleaning was typically the women of the house's job. Lange is capturing the living conditions of one of 34 Jewish families working in the garment industry in New York City who were offered a modern home and a factory job in High Stone, New Jersey through the New Deal. Lange could have captured the sleeping conditions or cooking conditions, but instead she focuses on the back porch. This area seems to be a haven for Mrs. Solomon, an open, clean air area she can go to get her housework done, a woman-dominated space. While showcasing the poor living conditions of these families, Dorothea Lange decides to focus on the poor working conditions of the women of the household. The homes in Hightstown come with a small plot of land. No longer will Mrs. Solomon need to share clotheslines with neighbors or have her peaceful space peered upon by stories of windows. Lange could have showcased Mr. Solomon's area, where he spends his time after work, but in the mid-20th century, the American goal was uplifting the common man, and Dorothea Lange wanted to shine light on how the strength of women in hard times can keep families and households together. In 2020, we are again faced with times of extreme uncertainty and hardship, and social roles are once again being challenged. While this photo was taken 84 years ago, the symbolism represented by Dorothea Lange speaks as much to us today as it did then. Challenged with accepting a new normal, we are once again in a place to uplift those who have been forgotten or oppressed. And thanks to the Met, the Tulane Alumni Association, Thomas Lee, and Anne Tenenbaum, we are able to showcase and remember the women and artists such as Dorothea Lange, who had such a prominent social impact in our society. Thank you, and I'm now pleased to introduce our next presentation by Cameron.
Hi, my name is Cameron Pigg, and I'm a creative scholar and a junior here at Tulane, and here is my presentation on an Andy Warhol self-portrait. From Artemisia Gentilsecchi's self-portrait as an allegory of painting to Delacroix's self-portrait as Ravenswood, the self-portrait has a long history of cementing not only the identity of the artist as a recognizable person, but also connecting them to their movement. Delacroix finds in himself the romantic hero. Gentilsecchi paints herself a muse in her own right. In that lens, Warhol's self-portrait from 1963 to 1964 not only serves to cement himself in his image, enigmatic, quirky, and loud, but also points towards his interest as an artist. It is important to note the amount of work required on Warhol's part to make this self-portrait. For these photo booth pictures, the only thing required on the part of Warhol was a quarter and a face to be captured. The result of his artistic process was a small strip of photo printed automatically by machine, the same way it did for hundreds of tourists. The only difference between him and the rest is that his photos will be printed in Harper's Bazaar. The interest in the procedurally generated, the representation of images, and the informality of photography and art more generally have defined Warhol's life and career. He infamously did little in the creation of his works, only signing his name to his pieces and conceiving of them conceptually, leaving the actual work of creation to assistants. The impulse in his self-portrait here is the same: leave the actual work of creation to the machine, and what is left for Warhol himself is concept. Warhol isn't Nader, elevating photography to the level of art. Instead, Warhol forces art into the muck of capitalistic mass production. The art of Warhol is that he made art common, and not just common, but commodity. The 50s and beyond saw a blossoming of a newfound informal relationship to the image, the kind that still exists today, surrounded as we are on all sides by images of ourselves and others. Warhol understood this relationship to the image, understood the rise of a capitalistic culture that more and more separates the image from its maker, the artist from their work, and the product of one's labors from the laborers themselves. Even in his self-portrait, we know Warhol, but we don't know who made the decisions for the design of the photo booth that absolutely influenced the art. Who, for example, put the fabric behind him. Warhol levels the playing field between art and the things that we, in the age of capitalistic mass marketing, don't consider art, but require some artistic skill, like photo booth set dressing. He begs the question, where is the line between art and non-art, if it exists at all? Is it a name, a face, the conviction that the work was made by an artist, perhaps? Warhol effectively suggests in his work that art is whatever people will agree that it is. When we think of the self-portrait of the artist, we often think of the long-suffering painter, madness in their veins, and the grip of the muses upon them, desperately trying to make and remake themselves in paint and oil, saying, "I'm here, I made this of myself and from myself and as a reflection of myself." It's easy to think of Warhol as different, like his use of ready-made tools like the photo booth make him something else, a prophet, perhaps, of commodity and culture. However, his self-portrait follows in the same impulse as all the artist portraits before him, connecting himself to his artistic image. He cements himself as the artist of the lowest common denominator of popular culture and of a culture of images, all within 4 shutter clicks of a photo booth in the middle of the city that never sleeps. It has been a pleasure presenting for you all, and now I would like to present Ms. Alex Landry for our final presentation.
Thank you so much, Cameron. I am Alex Landry, and I'm going to be talking about Cindy Sherman's Untitled film still number 48. So what you're going to see is a black and white photograph. A female figure stands at about our eye level to the left, facing away from us at the bend of a winding road. Even though we can't be sure, the stillness evokes an eerie silence out of an Alfred Hitchcock film. Notice the details of her clothing. Her white blouse and socks contrast the darkening environment. Her hands held behind her in anticipation. The skirt, tied up blonde hair, and suitcase at her feet all imply to the viewer that this is a young woman taking flight. This photo is one out of a series of film stills shot by Cindy Sherman in the late 1970s, each featuring an imagined woman in various costumes and contexts. These photos arrive at a timely convergence with postmodern notions of appropriation, identity politics, specifically female identity, and conceptualism. How so? It's a neat little trick. In every photograph, as in this innocent runaway scene, Cindy Sherman is the woman pictured, wearing clothes from thrift shops, from luxury brands, from her own wardrobe. Sherman emulates a type of woman, and rather a stereotype of woman. Although difficult to see, this is not a great photograph by technical means. The grainy surface texture complements her references to early filmmaking from which this scene is conceptually derived. But this isn't a film, it's a still, an isolated cross-section out of a full narrative, and the moment Sherman hinges on is full of emotional anticipation. The viewer is left to fill in the gaps about where she's going, why she is going, and what is imminently waiting for her. However, these questions have different answers for each woman she poses. And therein lies the crux of Sherman's both postmodern and feminist deconstructive strategy. Each woman alone is a type, promiscuous or innocent, maybe sassy or modest, but the strict nature of this binary tells us that it is impossible for her to be both. And so as the construction builds, as she explicitly pinholes all of these women into their neat little spaces, she undermines their distinctions by being them all. The logic of their separation, of their legitimacy as models of feminine traits, falls apart. If the viewer were to begin to question why Sherman invites the viewer's interpretation, and therefore to question our own desires, presumptions, and conditioning, one slowly begins to detach the visual identifiers that make up the feminine composition. The untitled film stills draw from the familiar era of 50s and 60s lowbrow television and exemplify Sherman's trademark appropriation and transformation of popular media, movies, and art history to comment on contemporary issues. Her influence was twofold. Her willingness to explore the extent of feminine identity encouraged other female artists forward, and to a broader extent, weakened an ideological barrier between the woman and the pluralist individual. On the other hand, as she would say, she's a postmodernist over a feminist. The work also contributed to a trend bent on disseminating the functions of mass culture, but from at last a uniquely female perspective. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to hand this back to Michael Plant.
I want to thank Quint and Cameron and Alex for those presentations. I think you can see why working with Tulane undergraduates is a privilege and how proud I am of them and their accomplishments, particularly this late in the semester and preparing for final exams. At this point, I'm excited to introduce our next two presenters, who will teach us even more about this exhibition. Jeff Rosenheim is a 1986 Tulane graduate and curator in charge of photographs at the Metropolitan Museum. Jeff will take us through the exhibition along with current parent and board of Tulane member Ann Tenenbaum. Ann and Jeff, please take it away.
Okay.
Jeff. Hi, I'm Ann. Before Jeff arrives, I will say hello to everyone.
Am I not
Thank
there?
you. No, now you're here.
All right. Sorry, I'm
Thank
a
you.
little struggling. Okay. Ann, do you want to lead?
Sure. I was just going to say thank you to everyone for joining us. Originally, this was going to be an in-person event. You know, when we thought about it a year ago, but I actually have come around to thinking that I'm glad that it's a virtual event because we were able to include so many more people from so many places and also to have the students speak to us. And I mean, actually they're much more informed and have thought much deeper about the photos than I have. So maybe Jeff, you should walk around the show with them.
Sure.
But thank you for joining. And I love Tulane and I'm happy to be able to share my collection and the show with you all.
Well, thank you, Ann. Hi, everybody. It's hard to imagine doing a tour like this without the pictures being there. But Ann and I thought we would just show you a glimpse of how we installed the exhibition. It's kind of special for us. It's not all white walls. It relates to how Ann and Tom live with art. And also, I just want to say that the show is not organized chronologically or thematically. We have 3 galleries, but it allowed us to tell a kind of history of photography from around World War I. The picture second to the right is the earliest in the show. It's a strand from 1916. But we also were able to look at ways in which pictures could be massed together. The centerpiece is a group of Sigmar Polka photographs. And we wanted to also explore the transformation of photography in these 100 years. And it moved from black and white and small to large in color. And that transformation is continuing as people are now working digitally. And so what I thought I'd do is just give you a glimpse of how scale is an issue in collecting a photography over the last 100 years, and how Anne and Tom have dealt with it. We'll come back to this picture in a second.
Yeah, but we don't see the pictures, I don't think.
Oh, is no one seeing the pictures?
I don't see the pictures. Maybe I'm the only one.
I hope that's not the case.
Well, it could just be me.
Well, we need some help from the Tulane people then.
Yeah, no one sees the pictures.
Okay, we're going to start over, and I'm going to share my screen again. I am very sorry, everybody. Why is this not working? And thank you, Virginia Heckert, for helping us with this. How about that?
There we go. Okay.
Hi, everybody. We're going to start over. Really, really sorry. I apologize. The idea we're going to begin, and we'll just replay this, is that we're just giving you a tour of how the pictures are installed in 3 galleries, which I've mentioned. And I'm very sorry, and thank you for speaking up, Anne. We did something different. We didn't organize this show in any real chronological or thematic way. And we really want to examine the way pictures tell their own stories. Their poetics are different. Their scale is different from the beginning of the period we're looking at, which is around World War I till now. I'm very sorry about that moment of glitch in our presentation. But what we wanted to do with the exhibition is to get people to look at pictures on their own, not to expect what is coming next, to keep the eye active, just like Anne and Tom as collectors did. And we're just going to now jump in. And Anne and I have put about 15 pictures together. And we're beginning with a Robert Frank picture, which Anne and I thought we could begin the discussion with. It's a picture made in Charleston in 1955. And it tells a story. And maybe Anne wants to jump in, and I can as well.
Sure. This was a picture that was very close to my own experience of growing up. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, just down the road from Charleston. And the moment I saw this picture, I recognized it, I understood it, and I felt the complexity of it. And I thought it was a very beautiful picture, a very sad picture, a poignant picture. And you know, I was really thrilled to be able to collect a beautiful print of it.
Yeah, so Anne's collection, there's a connoisseur, it's a connoisseur's delight. The pictures are some of the most iconic pictures, like this one, of 20th century photography, but also some of the most exquisite objects. She also has amazing pictures that haven't seen the light of day that she has discovered. And in the context of these more iconic pictures, they tell an interesting story. I just wanted to say that Robert Frank passed at the end of last year. He was an artist that those of us who have worked in the field were greatly inspired by. It sometimes takes an outsider to show us what is before us that we do not see. Frank said something really interesting, which was that, and it's a really lovely quote. He wrote, "Black and white are the colors of photography. To me, they symbolize the alternatives of hope and despair to which mankind is forever subjected. Above all, I know that life for a photographer cannot be a matter of indifference. It is the instantaneous reaction to oneself that produces a photograph." And I think you see this here in a very, very visceral way. We've watched it play out in the last political cycle. And it is the defining thing that both unites and divides the country about race in America. The next picture is one of all of our favorites. It's a work by William Eggleston. It is a picture from 1970, and it's about seeing as a creative act. Eggleston was the first person to really draw color out of commercial use and advertising and bring it into the field of the sort of fine art tradition of photography. And Anne and I see this very, very differently. And I think it'd be fun to chat about that.
Sure. So when Jeff and I were at my apartment looking at pictures, talking about which ones we were going to include in the show, we got to this picture and I said, I love this picture. I find it so complex and menacing and depressing. And he said, menacing and depressing? I find it powerful and masculine. And I said, yes, exactly. And it became one of the more interesting conversations that we had. You know, what I see is a suburban, late 60s, early 70s suburban existence that was bleak for women, and that there was, you know, this looked like something bad had happened and that trike was just abandoned there for some bad reason. Not what Jeff saw at all. So Jeff, tell us what you saw.
You know, I just remember being on my trike. I remember the freedom it offered to me. And I think the framing of this picture is an artist who's a living artist in this case, who sees the world from the perspective of bird's eye and worm's eye views. I like the way he's framed the Chevy across the street in its little carport through the tires of his, let's say, his own tricycle. But I also feel like it's about the American dream. It's about freedom and the road, which are so poetic, you know, key poetics to the American experience still to this day. But mostly it's about the pleasure of seeing. And for me, you know, it's also a reminder that the language of photography allows us to see through another person's eyes. In that Lang photograph that one of the excellent presentations looked at, it's important that Lang allowed you to see the frame of the window, that the frame of the window is a window to the world. And she could have left that out, so it would have just been the world. But she wants you to understand that this rectangle is the controlling device. And it's what we choose to see and what we choose to avoid that perhaps changes our lives. You know, we're starting with some of those iconic pictures, and we're going to get to some more esoteric ones, but this is one of my all-time favorite photographs. This is one of the masterpieces of 20th century photography. It's a work by D.N. Arbus. I actually did a show at the Tulane Art Gallery of D.N. Arbus photographs many years ago as a guest curator, even in my chair at the Met. One of the most interesting things about Arbus is that she was interested in people who were struggling with identity issues, just like she was, like we all are. And when you photograph identical twins, as in this case in New Jersey, it asks a question is, how do you become the person you want to be? How are you different from your brothers or your sisters? How do you overcome your genetics to transform yourself? And what does that mean when you're born with someone who looks just like you? And they're not Siamese twins, but they're put together by the photographer. They're joined together. Anne?
Yeah, I mean, this was what was interesting at first about this for me was that I had seen this image many, 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 many times. And, you know, never though in a beautiful print that was done by D.N. Arbus herself. And when I saw this in a gallery, and I was up close to the picture and the texture, it looked like a different object to me than all the reproductions I had ever seen. And that was fascinating to me. And obviously they're incredibly compelling. And it's a magnetic photo. And I definitely felt lucky that I was able to find one of the only signed original prints
it's magnificent
out there in the world.
Yeah, I have a little funny story. I had this picture on the wall of the Met a few years ago, and we made a poster of the image. And it was sold in the shop. And one day I got a call from the manager of the bookstore at the museum and said, Jeff, you got to come down. The twins are here. I said, what do you mean the twins are here? The twins are here and they're signing posters for the people buying the posters. And I ran down and sure they were there with their mother who had made these dresses and their husbands and their children. And it was like this unbelievable thing. It was like, you don't expect when you're looking at Rembrandt that one of the subjects would ever walk into the museum. But photography has another relationship with its moment. And it's so cool. I've actually met a lot of the subjects of Arbus. And it's just a whole other subject we can talk about later. Amazing picture. You know, the biggest thing that all of us suffer from is how are we an individual and how are we a member of the society that we live in? And that tension is something we carry all of our lives. And Arbus's work explores that in such a beautiful way. This is a three-part picture, a triptych, which follows all sorts of art historical rules and breaks them. And it's a picture made by Richard Avedon of Warhol's studio, the factory, in 1969, I think, yeah. And some of the individuals appear multiple times. And this is a picture that Anne, well, Anne, you can jump into, but.
Well, yeah, it was, I bought this picture when my kids were young and they were a little freaked out by Candy Darling there, naked, a man, but looked like a woman. So I had this one tucked way up high on a bookshelf. And I said to Jeff, now that I've seen it at the Met again, sort of afresh, they're older, they're Tulane students, they're old enough to have it at eye level. I'm going to have it hanging up where they can see it now.
Yeah, so the picture confirms and breaks the rules that that each frame has to have something individual and that the work doesn't have more than one of the same individual, but in fact this does. But Avedon told me something that he reminded me that we are all performers in everything we do as individuals, as members of society, and so is the photographer. The photographer is performing for her or his subjects, and we are performing looking at them. And he said, it's what we do for each other that is perform. We do it all the time, deliberately or unintentionally. It's a way of telling about ourselves in the hope of being recognized as what we'd like to be. And this is where Arbus and Avedon are really in the same thing. And I think the reason photography, and I've taught photography for almost 40 years, the reason photography is so great to teach in high school is when kids are going through puberty, they're asking those existential questions, and photography is constantly doing that. And that is just a beautiful thing about the medium, and it's a beautiful thing about Anne and Tom's collection.
This was possibly the photo that started me out in collecting. When I moved to New York 35 years ago, a friend of mine had a poster of this image in her apartment, and I just loved the image. And this was when there were poster stores in the world, and I started going in and out of every poster store in every city I ever traveled to, and including in New York, and I never ever found the poster. So when I started looking at and collecting photos, and I saw this one day, I didn't even ask how much it was. I was so excited to have this image that for me was really seminal. I thought it's a very beautiful, very intricate photo. And I look at it every single day when it's not at the Met, because I hung it up in my bathroom. So I see it multiple times a day. And it's remains one of my very favorites.
Yeah. So Anne and Tom's collection has depth in the nude figure. You can see that from the last couple of pictures. And for a woman collector and working as a guy with her, it was really interesting to see how these pictures are part of her life, this sort of strength, this sort of sense of self and confidence. And the model for this picture is Karis, who became Weston's wife almost as soon as this picture was made. It was a picture that was made almost the day they met, and it transformed his life. It changed him. But this idea that Anne sees this as a kind of, it's totemic for her. It is like this sort of stance of power and strength that she gets to look at every day. And I think it's, some people live with their art in one way, in drawers, and some people live with their art in every way to have it wash over them, give them confidence, ask questions. And I think as a curator working at the Met, I couldn't have had a more extraordinary partner during this process. So, well, I mean, I'll just, I've been obsessed by Walker Evans pretty much all of my life. I fell in love with his work when I was quite young, and I had the pleasure of bringing his archive to the Met. We have thousands of his pictures, and we collect and preserve his negative archive, his collection of other artists, his bottle cap collection, and his postcard collection, but we don't have this work. And it's been something that I've admired in Anne's collection. So there are two great language forms. Other than words and pictures, I know very little. I can't tell you too much about music. I know that Anne loves music. I can't tell you too much about film, although I know that Anne loves film. I can tell you a lot about words and pictures. And, you know, my undergraduate degree is in American literature, actually. This is an artist that is constantly putting those two things together. Walker Evans wanted to be a writer, but the idea that he could photograph a society, an entire society in Savannah, where Anne is from, in one picture, and behind this idea of the studio is the street for Walker Evans. And this is a picture made exactly at the same time as the Dorothea Lange of the view onto the fire escape with the women's work. And Anne told me a wonderful, really heartbreaking story about a discussion she had when she saw this picture with her parents.
So my dad grew up in Savannah, and when well, actually the first time I saw this picture was when I read Let Us Now Praise Famous Men in high school, which was a book that had told the story of the depression, the poverty in rural America through words and pictures. And Walker Evans took the photos and James A.G. wrote the text. And I remember loving photos from that book and seeing this picture. So when I bought this, I had a lovely time with my dad trying to see if he knew anyone, if he could recognize anyone in the window of this photographer's studio in Savannah. Yeah. And he didn't know anybody. I think it was a little before his time being cognizant, but it was lovely to talk about the picture with him.
Yeah. I wish I'd been there, Anne.
Yeah, it's nice.
So we're jumping around. We looked a little at the 30s, a little at the 50s and 60s, and now we're jumping to the 1990s. This is a work by Andreas Gursky. It's actually 10 feet wide. We showed it with the small pictures next to it in one of the views of the galleries. This is really one of the first great digital photographs, and it was manipulated by Gursky using the new tools of Photoshop. And what he did was he removed the goods for sale at a Prada store that he had photographed very carefully, which is something new to photography. It had to have done with airbrushing and literally cutting away at the negative before. And there were all these new digital tools. And he removed the handbags and the luxury shoes, etc. He then stretched the image to sort of cinematic scope. It's very much of a bravura use of technology. And then he cleaned it up and he presents this as this overwhelming picture of absence, of the void, of perhaps, if you want to read it that way, the emptiness of a photographer's life when something can be put in and taken out. And there's no sense of it being a document of anything but the idea that the photographer had. And it vibrates in that way between something we want to believe is real and something we kind of know is not. I think it's a stunning work of art that is very troubling and very much changed from the moment we hung it before the COVID time took over to when we're talking about it now, this emptiness of our stores and our souls in a certain sense, and this feeling of absence. This picture did take on more meaning in this time for me.
That, I think I agree. And that is something I love about art in general, is that it continues to unfold all the time. You know, the meanings change, your perspective changes, it stirs up different things in you, or responds to different things out in the world. And I think Jeff's right about this picture. I used to look at it one way, sort of as a commentary on what Cameron was talking about, Warhol being a prophet of commodity. You know, I saw it as a picture about the emptiness of shopping, and now I see it much more as a picture about the emptiness of us inside.
Yeah.
And it's very, poignant that way. It's also a very big macho picture.
Yeah.
Very macho.
So this picture is 10 inches and the other one is 10 feet. And we intentionally put them together. On your screen, you're seeing them exactly the same size in a certain sense. But we had a really good reading by one of the professor's students. I don't want to touch that. I don't want to mess with that, except to say that whatever has happened to her, whatever she's looking for, she's constantly not getting it. And whatever she's running away from, she's still running away from. And whatever she's looking for, it's still there. So this sort of noir-esque problem of the both excitement of what is unknown is very much a part of this structure. And I think it's an amazing thing. And it's also really quite small. And I think one of the problems is that everything is supersized now. We've lost the ability to look at small things. And the way Anne lives with her collection and the way I try to I tried to put it on the wall was to get people to look at the big things that you have to stand far away and the small things that you kind of want to hold in your hand. Scale is something that art deals with in every way. And we teach art in art history and we show art in museums, and we rarely get the opportunity to deal with this issue. And I think in the show, sorry to say, those of you who haven't seen it, but I think we did it in a nice way, just the way Anne at home.
I think this was the first photo I actually bought when I started collecting. I didn't even know who Cindy Sherman was, but I was very drawn to the tableau. And I agree, Alex gave a phenomenal reading of the picture. The only thing I would say is, for me, I wasn't sure if she was coming or going.
Right.
You know, for me, yes, she could be running away, but she also could be trying to get back home after having had some, you know, not so good experience out in the world. So I love the ambivalence of it as well.
I think that's really true. I also like the fact that, you know, this is a constructed image, and she needed someone to, you know, press the shutter, and it was her dad. And I just sort of like this idea also that it's sort of clear that the light on her is the light of the car that they use to get to this location. It's fascinating to me, wonderful thing, and just a knockout print of it. So this is a picture I just wanted to share with you. Probably most of you don't know Garrett Petrus Fioret. He's a kind of an obscure artist from The Hague, from Holland, and is an artist that we did not have in the museum's collection. And I just wanted to use this to remind us that great collectors like Anne and Tom, and collectors that are passionate, even if they haven't achieved the level of Anne and Tom's collection, can transform museum collections by showing us things that we either hadn't seen or didn't know of or refused to look at. And this is a stunning object by an artist who was sort of on the spectrum and was afraid that people were stealing his ideas. And he started stamping the fronts of his pictures with the rubber stamps that had his copyright notice and his address that normally go on the back. And he stamped them all over in a kind of fetishistic way to avoid people stealing his ideas, and it only made them more powerful and stronger. And I think this picture is used beautifully in the catalog and in the show. For those of you who are tuning in, the book turned out really nicely. I want to throw my hat to my colleagues in the production department as well as in the editorial department for producing the book, which we hope will become a kind of a textbook for professors to use. Pretty cool. We only have a few more pictures, and we are going to then move to the next part of our program. The next picture is by Gregory Crudson, who really does deal with tropes from cinema and film. And Anne, do you want to throw this out there?
Sure. For me, I think the way Gregory, his pictures are film. He sets up an entire film set to film his pictures, as stills. But for me, this picture, the story that is told or can be told in a number of ways through this picture is incredible. It's an entire movie in one shot. And it's very beautiful. It's very dark. I have it hanging in my bedroom in our beach house. And my husband's favorite joke is, "Oh, this is Anne's view of our marriage." Ha ha, which is not true, but it is. It is a beautiful, dark picture, and I love the contrast of those two ideas, which I think Gregory is always very interested in.
Yeah, just though, that trail is of rose petals. The protagonist seems to have taken the rose bush out of the garden and dragged it up to her bedroom and placed it in the bed, and is not fearful of it, but she's seems to be contemplating it in a very, very interesting way. Don't want to keep us too long on this, but Hiroshi Tsukimoto is just a splendid picture maker. He's a Japanese artist, spends a lot of time in the States, and he was interested in the passing of time. Usually we think of photography as being one moment, but in this case, this is the entire duration of a feature film. So that white rectangle is the collection of all the scenes in the movie in this beautiful theater. And all the other parts of the theater are being illuminated by the reflection off the screen. So this idea of using the interior of a beautiful palace movie theater to make a picture about the exposure of photography and time exposed is such a nice metaphor for thinking about time and time elements in both the field of photography and in film. And it's also one of the most gorgeous prints that you could imagine. I'm going to jump ahead, and I want to talk about this picture because of Tulane and my experience being there. This is a picture about football. It's called A Football Landscape. It's by Catherine Opie, who's an artist that is a professor. Teaches in.
By the way, whose son is a Tulane freshman?
Oh my!
Her son Oliver is at Tulane. I forgot that.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah. So Catherine photographed both players, basically high school football players, and did portraits and game scenes. And it's really hard to work in this space. When I was actually in graduate school at Tulane, I taught intro photography. And I had a student named Burnell Dent who went on to a professional career as a linebacker. And he was in my intro photo class. And he said to me at the beginning that I'm not going to be able to make it to every class. We're a traveling football team, and I just can't do your assignments, Professor Rosenheim. And I said, here's the story. You're not on the field every play, and you're on the sideline. I want to see what it looks like to you as a player from the sideline. So it's a very, very interesting thing. The camera is with you all the time now with this thing, this device. And as a teacher, and Brunel did really good pictures, an insider's view. And so Catherine Opie is exploring the sort of gladiator aspect. And it's an issue about black and white as well. So this is a big picture in the show, and it packs a punch. We're just gonna throw 3 more at you. This is one of my favorite pictures. It's a Moholy-Nagy photograph. He's known as a professor at the Bauhaus, and he made pictures that explore the positive, negative aspect of photography, but it's this sort of impossible to understand, surrealist in a certain way, view of the nude figure, but also the language of photography, breaking down the technological aspect and the visual aspect, and then constructing an image that is both the natural world and the human world in a very, very beautiful way. And it's a negative print. So this inversion is something that the Bauhaus was so well known for. If you don't mind, I'm going to hit the next 2, this next one very quickly, Anne, because I want to get to the next part. So this is a collaborative work between 2 Swiss artists, Fischli and Weiss. They worked together on many things, including video and film and photography. And they had an idea that one of them would, without the other knowing it, make pictures of the most banal subject, which is flowers, in a suburban environment, and then send the film but leave the leader out, put it in the other photographer's co-author's camera, and photographed urban flowers, and then have the overlap to decide where the work of art lied as kind of chance occurrences. I like this idea that that 2 artists could collaborate and then decide where there was or was not a work of art. It's a big, beautiful color picture, and it's from the 90s when photography is transformed by the success of color. We're going to close with this picture. This is a work by a living artist named Zanelli Moholy. This is the first work by the artist to enter the museum's collection as a gift of Anne and Tom. And it's called Vukani. It means in the artist's language, wake up. And this is a series of self-portraits that the artist made when they wake up, wherever they are in the world. And it's a picture about what hasn't happened yet in their daily life and what is metaphorically going to happen. So the camera is ready at the bedside. The idea that this is before you take your first breath. And I think as a way of using black and white photography, a return to a tradition is so powerful, and also being a witness to what is ahead. And this is an artist who's a social activist. And I think this is one of the great new pictures in our collection. And Anne, you can tell me,
No, I think it's a very beautiful picture. I saw the work in a hotel in an exhibition down at Crystal Bridges, not this work, but another work by the artist. And it doesn't happen to me that often now that I see something and I need to find out what it is. And I saw this artist's work and I needed to find out about the work. And so this was the picture that I bought in the end. And I just think it's, the tonality is incredible. The subject is incredible, very beautiful identity, again, an identity picture and a black and white picture. So.
And a picture that is connected to the artist's commitment to photography and social justice. We ask the question over and over, what is the role of the museum in our society today? What is the role of the artist in our society today? And here, what is the role of the camera in our society today? What can it do? And how can we make it a better place? So this is an artist that asks all of those questions and is going back to its fundamental black and white nature in a very powerful way, using it symbolically. And we thought it'd be a good place to close our little presentation. So I believe Professor Plant is going to take over.
Yes, indeed. And I want to thank you, Anne and Jeff. That was extraordinary. And I think I speak for the entire audience. We are starved for art. It's been months. And this wasn't the same thing as seeing it ourselves, but it was pretty amazing to see that collection. Okay, so we're going to move into, so thank you. And we're going to move into a kind of question and answer segment. And so I want to suggest again to the audience that you can submit questions via chat. But I want to start with a question from one of my classes. So at Tulane now, we have a rather unique course we offer in art history, which is on the fundamentals of art acquisition and collections management. And we do everything from, personal or institutional collecting, acquisition, insurance, conservation, all of those things. So my students have asked me already to secure an invitation to Anne to join with us next semester.
That would be my pleasure.
And meet with us. But they've also sent me some questions tonight about your collection. And the question everyone still has, you mentioned starting with that incredible, iconic Cindy Sherman, the greatest Cindy Sherman, right? No question, I think, to anybody. How did you then go forward from there? I mean, what was the logic of your collection?
Well, so, a museum has to collect according to a lot of rules. I will say that for better or worse, I collect based on my instinct. I sort of live instinctively anyway, and my instincts are strong. And I trust them, actually, for whatever reason I couldn't even tell you. But I think because I had a mother who had strong instincts and she trusted them. And so I met my husband, he was getting divorced. He had a collection with his ex-wife. It was of old master paintings I wasn't particularly interested in living with. So he said, all right, we'll go buy some art. I was a kid. I was, 32 years old, and I didn't even know what he meant. But I did know that photographs were less expensive than anything else. So I was going to buy photographs. And I started looking at them. I had an interest anyway because of film and Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. And I started buying according to what I liked. I think you don't want to pay a stupid price, and you don't want to buy something that's in terrible condition. But other than that, I really went with my gut. And I ended up with a collection that was very personal and perhaps has lots of holes in it because I never, ever bought what someone told me I was supposed to buy. I only bought what I loved and wanted to live with.
Professor, it's kind of a beat journey. And it really is a beat journey. It was a road trip. And I think that, this was when photography was just coming of age. We'd gotten through the 70s and 80s. And when Anne starts in the early 1990s, things were just coming out of the woods. And there was just fantastic opportunities. The artists like Cindy Sherman and Laurie Simmons and Richard Prince and others were beginning to find an audience, and things were happening. And for the very first time, photography was sort of clawing its way into the art world. And Anne was just ready for it because she'd already done the art world. She knew the art world. And photography was this sort of bad boy medium. And
well, I was just starting in the art world, but I didn't care what the art world said. I only wanted to do what I wanted to do.
Well, one of the questions we received was how long you've been collecting for. So you started in the early 90s?
Yeah. I started in 1993, actually. Or maybe early 94. So, it's been a long time now.
And at what point did you realize it was a collection?
It's a good question. And almost not until Jeff called me and asked me if I had any interest in maybe having him do a show of my collection. And I knew in some abstract sense it was a collection, but I really never thought of it that way. And it wasn't, one of the things that was exciting for me about this whole process was coming to terms with the fact that it is a collection, and having to take ownership of that in a way that I was shy about, actually, and worried about. when he suggested the show. So it's actually been a growth experience for me too, learning about myself and my, my desire to collect, which I kind of denied.
Are you describing really a sense of responsibility to the art? I mean, is that what you're saying, or?
More to the vision, I think. I always felt a responsibility to the art, and and I'm thrilled to be able to have it live on in a museum and accessible to more people. But I guess I had to take ownership of my own vision, even though it wasn't a cohesive one that I had designed on purpose.
Yeah, so
it emerged.
Let me jump in there. Sort of working with Anne she's like a rare type of arts patron. It was more like working with an artist than a collector. And that's what's so fresh about it. And that's what's so amazing. There was a different picture on the floor, on the shelf. It was like constantly changing, and each home had its own weird kind of experience. And how great is that? It was an inspiration for me. And I realized that she was showing me things that I should have seen. If I had been doing my job better, I would have seen them, and I wouldn't have let them get away. And it's because artists and galleries really, really liked working with Anne, and they still do, because she brings this energy that, we all are drawn to magnetically.
Yeah, I get that. I see it. So nobody ever stops collecting. What's next? What's your wish list? Where are you maybe going to go next?
Well, a few years ago, when I started, photographs were relatively speaking, inexpensive, great photographs. As the years went on, they got, more and more expensive. And then it got to a point where it wasn't as much fun for me, because everything felt so weighty. If you're going to buy it, it was so much money. So I kind of turned to ceramics, actually, artists' ceramics, and started buying things, that, for $5,000, you could buy almost anything that an artist was making. And I found that exciting and interesting. So I've now developed a ceramics obsession. So in a few years, we can do a class on that.
I'm game. We have just a few more minutes, but we are also getting questions about the process of the exhibition itself. How long it's taken to plan, how actively Anne was involved in the installation, which is remarkable. Just what few photographs we saw, the colors are amazing, that orange, that purple. Could you speak a little bit about the process and how long it's taken?
Jeff?
Sure. So quite a long time ago, we started thinking at the museum about how to celebrate our 150th anniversary. And I didn't think too long about it. It was like, what if I could work with Anne to do a show of her collection? And that was like 5 years ago, the seed, the inspiration. And then we started talking, and I didn't know the collection as well as I know it now, but I still don't know it all. And Anne allowed me in the door, and I stuck my foot in. And this is just a good lesson on innocence and perseverance a little bit. But I think—
And on not opening your door to a curator.
Yeah, but Anne is passionate, and I think I had to match it with a little bit of my own to begin a dialogue. We'd known each other, but this brought us together a lot. And we literally sat down and looked at things together and then talked about what they could do. And I had to find a way to just take these things that seemingly were disparate and put them together. The show is not organized chronologically, but I saw that there was this vector, this arc, let's say, from the World War I era, from the modernism of the teens to the anxieties of the digital moment that we're in, from specialty materials in the 1910s to ubiquity today. I mean, that's the thing. So we are living in a moment where pictures are everywhere, and I needed to synthesize it. And we literally whittled it down. And I knew I needed about 80 pictures in these 3 galleries. And Anne, one of the questions, is that the book in your hand?
Yes, I was just going to show it.
You hold it up.
This is the catalog that that the museum put out. It is really beautiful and interesting, and it's you can get it on the website, the Met website, for sale. Jeff and I don't get the money; it's a museum publication, but it's really, if you're interested in the photos, it's worth looking at because the reproductions are beautiful and it tells the story in a more full way. So I suggest you take a look if you can find that and buy it.
But just to answer your question in a very literal way, the show opened on March 10th to the public. The catalog and all the essay, and it's kind of long, single author essay for the book, and a great interview with Anne that we edited down, had to be turned in a year earlier. So we had to finish the book 12 months before it went on the wall. And then I had to figure out how to get it on the wall, and everything had to be photographed. It was a long journey. It took about 3 years to together. And in the space between the essays going into the book to the opening of the show, we had to figure out how to tell yet another story that was about how the pictures fit together in a kind of complex, but not typical pattern. And then we had to deal with color. And we did it, I think, pretty well.
And it looks incredible. Well, we are just about out of time. I want to thank Anne. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks to Max, to Quint, and to Cameron, and to Alex. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Yes, they were fantastic. Very impressive. Yeah.
I just want to remind people you can view today's webinar and any previous webinars at alumni.tulane.edu/plugin. And I want to thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a great night, and thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.